Good afternoon, live from the offices of Coldwell Banker, Tamarindo Realty. My name is Matt Rosensteel here, broadcasting live on the Facebook page of Latitude 10. If you're watching us on Facebook, please give us a like. If you're watching a subsequent broadcast on either my YouTube channel or on Tony's future YouTube channel, then please click subscribe by finding the red button below the video. Thank you very much for joining us today from Tamarindo.
Hi, by the way, I'm Tony DiMaggio.
Today, as always, I'm Matt Rosensteel. First came to Costa Rica in 2008 as a Peace Corps volunteer, doing my normal broadcast. I think this is episode number 12 of Costa Rica FAQ. But today is the first broadcast for which I am joined by Tony DiMaggio. I'm going to hold the mic here just to make sure we're getting picked up.
Sure.
Tony is a real estate professional with about more experience than virtually anybody else in the Tamarindo area.
What he's really trying to say is I'm an old guy, but that's not right.
Yes, frequently on my show, my perspective is flavored by the fact that I'm one of the younger people down here in Costa Rica, and I wanted to invite somebody like Tony, who's got a bit more experience here, on to discuss. Tony, thank you very much for joining us.
Sure.
I appreciate it. Today, we're sort of going to do some general discussion to get knowledge from Tony. First of all, as somebody who's been in this real estate market for a very long time. And second of all, as somebody who is similarly aged to a lot of people that we're working with coming down to Costa Rica. Tony had, like we mentioned, has a bit more experience, and I think some of his opinions will be interesting to hear for some of our retirement age people joining us. So thank you very much for joining us.
Happy to do it.
If you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the comments section of the Facebook video. You can also post them on the comment section of our YouTube videos, or if you want to contact either me or Tony after the broadcast with follow-up questions, feel free to write us at either matt@cbtamarindo.com or tony@cbtamarindo.com. Today we've got a pretty long list of topics to cover. We'll start out with a discussion between me and Tony, me picking Tony's brain, and then we're going to move on to questions if anybody feels inspired to post here. We might be joined by a few people live from around the world who are anxious to ask you something as well.
Right.
We'll be taking a look at the history of the Guanacaste real estate market, a brief history, the changes that Tony has seen from 2001 to 2019, both in Costa Rica and in the real estate market in general. We'll ask you about sort of the common pitfalls that you've seen in your career of people looking to invest here. And from there, we'll start talking a little bit about your clients and who you've seen that are successful here in Costa Rica and people who end up loving it versus people who end up not being as successful. And then we'll wrap up with a few questions that are specific for people who are young at heart, with some retirement age specific questions, also looking at health insurance. Before we start, I want to give a quick shout out to Lily. We'll be answering a question about health insurance here, and also to my recent clients, Kim and Annette. I hope you're watching, as well as Agnes and Cornell, if you're able to tune in. Looking forward to seeing you all here again in Costa Rica soon. Without further ado, let's get started really quick. Tony, if you'd give us the quick background, who you are, why you came to Costa Rica, and how you keep busy.
I just, when I'm working with clients, they'll often ask me, why Costa Rica? How did you find out about this place? What kind of was the tipping point for you? And my story is kind of a strange one, but the short part of it is that when I was a little boy, about 8 years old, my uncles came down here on a gold expedition. They had done research and found out that a Spanish galleon had gone down off of Cocos Island, and they never found the treasure. Well, our family, we all thought they were half crazy. They loaded up a bunch of stuff, came down, put it on a barge, went out to Cocos Island, which, by the way, is where they filmed lots of Jurassic Park.
Okay.
And they swam with hammerhead sharks, never found anything. But it planted the seed of Costa Rica in my mind because they came back with these coolest stories, and the police were watching them and the park rangers, and they were seeing if they found the treasure and all of that. Anyway, before we get into real estate, I have to tell you about, 7 years ago or so, guess what? They found the treasure. my uncles were vindicated, and they found $200 million worth of gold. And what happened was that my uncles were diving in the water for the gold, but they had offloaded the gold to the island, and the park ranger, after 400 years or so of erosion, they looked down and they were standing on the treasure.
Oh, geez.
Isn't that amazing?
That has to be the single craziest why did you move to Costa Rica story, or how did you find out about
What
it?
happened was all the years later, our family was trying to figure out where we might celebrate the millennium, and it just popped out of my subconscious mind. Let's go to Costa Rica. We'll go to a top of a volcano.
Okay.
And we'll greet the sunrise and bring in the new millennium as a family, and we'll never forget this. Well, what happened is we found out that the volcanoes are very hard to climb. There's loose rock. It's dangerous as hell. And on top of that, it's usually shrouded in clouds.
Yeah.
So when we got here, we changed all of our plans, and we came to the beach communities. We traveled all over Costa Rica, and then we found Tamarindo. We're up on the hill. I'm looking at the sunset over the bay with the boats, and it was as clear as anything could be. I go, my search is over. I knew this was the place.
Okay, wow. Yeah, from a treasure hunt to the hills of Tamarindo. It's great that you made that decision quickly. It's funny, we talked to people a couple weeks ago on this show or this podcast who also had just sort of stuck in Costa Rica. They planned to do all sorts of research, and they had an aha moment where they realized this was right for them. They canceled their search everywhere else. Hi to Randy and Lisa if you're watching, or if you can watch this, but that's a super cool story.
Well, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes you have clarity. When we're working with clients, they fall into a couple different categories. One type of client is super analytical, and they're going to just analyze everything, and I respect that. That's their process. But for me, I'm more of a feeling-natured person. And so when I saw it, I felt I can make this happen. I read a book a long time ago called In Search of Excellence by Tom Peters, and in that book, he talks about the importance of reinventing yourself every 5 years.
Okay.
And I thought, what am I afraid of? What's holding me back from having this life adventure?
Yeah.
So we sat down with our family, we had a big powwow. When we found out our kids could get a first-rate education, then it became a possibility. And honestly, we kind of dared ourselves into this, and we did it.
Yeah, great. That was 2001 when you came down initially, and since then...
Well, 2000 we came down for the millennium, and 2001 we moved here.
Okay, and since 2001, you've specifically focused on real estate your entire 18 years, or have you had different professions?
No, solely real estate. I was a licensed broker in California.
Okay.
So it was very easy for me to fall back into that when I got here. My original plan was pretty much to be semi-retired or maybe even retired, which was a pipe dream. I mean, there was no way that was going to happen. And so, I couldn't keep myself out of real estate. It's just too much fun, and it was too interesting.
Yeah.
And I gravitated towards it. I was educated in it, so it was a natural fit.
Okay, great. There are definitely a ton of people looking to still keep some kind of activity going, and especially lots of people who have had careers that retirement doesn't sound like necessarily an enjoyable thing, just to be completely unoccupied. Lots of people are forced or need to keep working, but I think we see a lot of people as well who decide, I can't just sit on the beach drinking pina coladas all day. I got to do something. And so, real estate does become that pastime for a good number of people down here.
It's incredible. I mean, there's some similarities, of course, between being in real estate here and being in real estate in California, but there's some big differences too.
I am absolutely sure.
Yeah.
And speaking of differences, let's move on.
Sure.
You started working in real estate in 2001. Here we are almost 20 years later in Costa Rica, 18 years of experience later. What are the biggest changes that you've seen in that time, sort of in the Guanacaste real estate market? How have things evolved?
Well, when I came here in 2001, the main road into Tamarindo wasn't even paved yet. And it was all washboarding. It would take you like 30 minutes to get from the turnoff into Tamarindo. And everybody was so cynical that it would never get paved. And I'm going, but wait a second, the surveyor's out there. And I saw the tripod. They're, oh no, we've been seeing that for years. And, finally, of course, the trucks rolled in and they paved the street. So, I mean, the infrastructure is so much better today than it was in 2001 when I got here. The livability of the area is so much higher. We didn't have an auto mercado, which is sort of our equivalent of Whole Foods in the United States. We didn't have the ease of living here. We didn't have the number of educational choices for private schools. I mean, I would say the biggest change that I've seen is the livability of the area. I mean, it still has some challenges, we know, but it's a whole lot easier today than it was 17 or 18 years ago. And in terms of making good real estate decisions, we know who the good contractors are. We know who the good architects are. We had, back when I came here, it was a crapshoot. I mean, we were just, hoping for the best. Yeah. And I have to tell you, I built a pretty big home with a Costa Rican builder who didn't speak any English. I spoke hardly any Spanish, and it was a miracle. I don't know how this happened. We never had an argument. Yeah, we couldn't talk to each other. And we drew pictures in the dirt, on the wall, and somehow he built this home for us without a glitch. So, I mean, the area is rich with amazing stories that people can share with you as you kind of get into this. Yeah, that's sort of what I hear in general, and having only been here 11 years, the livability has increased plenty during my time, and I think that one of the reasons we're seeing so many expats flocking down here is that it is, you mentioned the difficulties of living here. There is still that authentic sort of Costa Rica, Central America experience. Which never goes away.
Yeah, exactly. Some things that can be improved still, but in general, the livability being much more elevated and sort of a nice balance between having those amenities and creature comforts that 20 years ago. Yeah, just as one quick example, when we first came here, there was one bank in town. Before that, there was a mobile bank. Okay. The old folks tell me the mobile bank would come in and it was here for a few hours and they'd be standing outside this thing. They had to get their banking done. When I came here, it was like going to Baskin Robbins, the ice cream shop. You'd get your number, you'd look up at the monitor, and then you'd extrapolate how long it might take for them to call your number, and then you'd go do all your errands and come back and try to time it. Now compare that with today where we have 4 or 5 or 6 banks air conditioned. It's just a completely different experience. The other thing that's changed a lot is the quality of construction. When I came in 2000, there really was no such thing as luxury condominium living. It really hadn't been done yet. And then shortly thereafter, as the market ramped up in 2003, 4, 5, that kind of time frame, developers took a chance and elevated the quality of the construction they were offering, including lots of luxurious features and details. And so the nature of what became available as product has undergone great changes. Okay. Yeah, and you were talking about the ramp up. Really, remind me, what year did Liberia International Airport open? I'm not sure, but I think it was open when we got here in 2000. Okay. Around that time frame, I think. And what years did you see the most frantic activity in that buildup that you were talking about?
Well, I mean, you look at market cycles. We're no different than every place else in the world. We're subject to market cycles. So our big boom came back in 2002 to 2005 or six, and then we went through the devastation with the rest of the world when the market took a big hit. But I will say that Costa Rica probably fared better than most places because we didn't depend as much on mortgage financing. So that while the United States had lots of foreclosures, because we're more of a cash market, we had, I think, less of a dramatic impact.
Yeah.
And so, in a way, I feel like our market is better off for that. And we're really a more secure financial decision because we're not giving, these kinds of crazy loans.
Yeah, that's important to bring up. Costa Rica for foreigners is a cash real estate market. Slowly, there are some options appearing for foreigners to be able to finance the purchase of their home, but by and large, 99. What would you say out of all of the real estate transactions you've done? Only a couple financed.
Only a few. Once in a while, we'll have seller financing, where seller might step in almost like bridge financing because maybe a buyer. Typical scenario is a buyer has assets, but they're not liquid.
Yeah.
So they may need a couple of years to move their assets around and get in a cash position. In those situations, sometimes we can find a seller that'll offer, short-term financing until that can be satisfied. So, virtually all our deals, like you say, are cash deals or seller financing for the short term.
Yep. You've touched pretty well, I think, on some of the changes in Costa Rica, especially, and to sum up, really, the infrastructure, the livability of the area, and also the quality of the product available. There's definitely been a progression upwards in those sorts of categories catering to expats in general in the 20 years you've been here. In that time, the big changes in real estate have obviously been the same ones that affected the entire world, where, if we're on a cyclical market and the financial crash absolutely devastated things in Guanacaste in 08 and 09, where are we today in 2019 on our ride through the cycle in Costa Rica?
Well, what I love is a balanced market. I'm leery of markets that go too vertical up because they seem to go very vertical down as well. And so I think over the years, of my many years in the real estate profession, what I really like is a balanced market where sellers have their place, buyers have their place, and nobody feels like they're in control of the market. And I would say over the last 3 or 4 years, that's what we have. And I like what I'm seeing because sellers have to be sensitive to the way a buyer thinks. Buyers have to be sensitive to the way a seller thinks. And the skill of what I think we offer for our clients is to be able to bridge the gap between buyers and sellers and give them good guidance so they can come together.
Yep.
In an imbalanced market, that's hard to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. A frenzy in either direction can be more fun or interesting, for one side of the transaction. But right now it does feel very much like in most transactions, it's not really like one party gets to bludgeon the others over the head or that it's a strong buyer's.
It'd be a fair deal for both parties. The other thing that I like in our market for a long time, we never talked about appreciation because there wasn't any anywhere.
Yep.
Okay, so now appreciation is back in the scenario when we do our calculations of return on investment, because as you know, many of our buyers, they're really interested in their motivation for buying might be a vacation home, but almost everybody puts their vacation home into a rental pool. So they ask questions about what can they expect in terms of return on investment. And, what we're seeing is that in this type of a market, their buyers are actually able to cover all their expenses and generate positive cash flow and have a component of appreciation that's reasonable to factor into their expected ROI.
Yeah. Great. We have a question from Alejandro Rivera. He asks, nice to see you there, Tony. Go over legal and financial stability. Fellows from abroad should have this advantage quite clear. Yeah, I think, what Alejandro is pointing out there, the Costa Rica in comparison to other countries having very much legal and financial stability, especially in relationship to other countries in Central America and Latin America. And I think a lot what that's reflected in, a lot of times people are surprised at the price points at which we're working here in Costa Rica. They imagine that things are going to be super cheap, or that they're going to be able to find an extremely good deal, but they don't realize that they're paying for this higher quality infrastructure, the legal and financial stability that sort of Alejandro alludes to. Costa Rica in general is a higher quality product and can be priced higher. Thanks for your comment, Alejandro.
Yeah, thanks, Alejandro. My experience with the legal profession here has been very positive. I feel in a very real way that our relationship with lawyers, we facilitate each other. We give lawyers business, but they help us close deals.
Yep.
So we work as a team on behalf of our clients' interest to be able to communicate well and make sure all their needs are met.
Yep. Going back to what you were talking about, we can finally see appreciation again in real estate prices. So just to make it clear for the viewers, what years would you say that was impossible to get appreciation?
During the collapse of the worldwide financial markets, from probably 2006 approximately or 7 to about 2010, 11, 12, there was no appreciation.
Yeah, and so you really felt that, so back in 2006, already Costa Rica was starting to shift out of upswing and frenzy mode and sort of crash and level out.
It was, it stabilized. So, once there was an adjustment like there was everywhere, it stabilized. But when we were asked about ROI calculations, we couldn't really factor in appreciation because too much time had gone by where there wasn't any, so it wasn't realistic to throw it back in.
Yeah.
But now it would be unrealistic not to consider it.
Yeah.
So, for example, we've done amazing analyses for our clients and it turns out whether you're buying a $2 million home on the beach or a $150,000 condominium, the range of return on investment falls in a very narrow gap.
Okay.
And it's, and I keep doing the analysis and it keeps coming out the same. And for the most part, there are exceptions, but for the most part, the cash on cash return seems to fall in a 4 to 7% range.
Yep.
And I think it's unrealistic not to assume or calculate and anticipate at least a 3% to 5% appreciation rate.
Okay.
So when you combine, take the lower end, take 3% plus say a 4% cash on cash return, I think it's completely reasonable to anticipate, a bottom line 7% ROI on an investment, which frankly is pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah, that's especially from your perspective, that's encouraging to hear, having been through more dips and turns than the average person. I would say that the longevity of a real estate agent in Guanacaste has to be a lot shorter than 17 years, or the typical longevity. So it's invaluable to see somebody who's been through cycles instead of just, 6 months ago I got here, and that sort of thing. So in looking at over 18 years, I would imagine this has changed somewhat, but now you have a lot of hindsight. And for the buyers that make mistakes or people who aren't quite as successful here, what are the most frequent or common errors over your career that you've seen expats looking to invest in Costa Rica make when they're looking for property, taking the plunge, moving down, etc.?
Sure. Well, this probably sounds self-serving, but it's a fact that because licensing is not a requirement of Costa Rican law, I think one of the biggest mistakes buyers make is working with somebody representing real estate that isn't a real estate professional, and they guide them down the wrong path.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you're not versed in real estate law, real estate ethics, maritime law, and all these other things that you need to be aware of, then buyers can get in trouble.
Yeah.
And so the mistake I see is when a buyer gets, I mean, as simple as getting in a taxi cab and they find out that your cab driver finds out you're looking at real estate, and of course he has a farm or a cousin or something. The next thing you know, you're doing business with people that are not professionals. So that's a huge problem. The other thing is making sure you pick the right real estate attorney.
Absolutely.
You know, because it's like any business, just because somebody is licensed is no guarantee that they operate at the highest levels of their profession. We created a real estate association years ago called CRGAR, which is the Costa Rica Global Association of Realtors. If you want to become a member of our real estate association, as you know, you have to take certain courses and become educated. And then you get your accreditation and your license to operate within our real estate association. Not required by Costa Rican law, but it is required to be part of our real estate association. So that's a huge thing to look for buyers, to make sure that your real estate agent is actually trained and licensed within the context of our association.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of one of the pros of Costa Rica is that everyone is unendingly friendly. And you meet a lot of people who arrive here, and during their week stay, 2 weeks or a month or however long they're here, they become enamored with somebody who has been just wonderfully helpful, guided them through, you know, finding different things in the area, and perhaps even shown them real estate. The whole time, everything is smiles and really positive feeling, and people are just sort of latch on to that. And pretty soon, they're looking at real estate with somebody who's selling their cousin's farm.
I have to tell a quick story that one of my best friends in the world came down here for Super Bowl weekend. He knows I'm the sales manager for Coldwell Banker, and he's walking down the beach and strikes up a conversation with a guy selling fishing trips, and the next thing he wants me to go look at a property that this guy's selling. I'm going,
Yeah. That's a story from nearly every day of the week for us in some cases where, everybody here is interested in making a buck in real estate, that's for sure. There are professionals who are doing this every day and that have done it for years and years. And then there are a huge mishmash of people that are doing it just to try and make a commission here and there. Really, I think that accreditation through CRGAR and any sort of formalization, talking to your agent or your realtor about their experience, how long they've been doing this in the area, how many transactions they've completed.
What's their educational background?
Yeah.
Were they practicing real estate before they came to Costa Rica? I mean, we all go through our due diligence process, but buyers need to do their due diligence. They need to make sure they understand the team that they're working with. That includes the agent, not just the realtors, but also the lawyers.
Yeah.
And, you know, and we do a lot of things other than normal real estate services. When we say to clients that we're a full service broker, that goes beyond the normal definition you might find in the United States, because part of that here is answering lots of questions about what is life like in Costa Rica.
Yeah.
You know, people oftentimes are looking for retirement. That's something that's changed a lot in my 18 years, is that the demographic of the typical buyer is a lot more people are looking for permanent retirement locations today than they were 18 years ago. And I think it's because as the baby boomers start moving through the system.
Yeah.
Okay. But a lot of them, they might say, you know, well, we're checking out Panama, we're checking out Belize, we're checking out this, we're checking out that. And so, you know, it's our responsibility to help people with this process and try to guide them. And I think it's healthy for people to consider lots of different areas, but for sure they're going to want to come to Costa Rica and make sure that they learn what they can about this particular country, because I don't think there's any place that's more favorable for retirement, really, than Costa Rica.
Yeah, that's definitely going back to the livability as well. You see that feedback cycle where Guanacaste becomes more livable, more retirees come, more retirees demand more services, and it goes back and forth. And so retirees gradually feel better here, and now...
Well, they do. I mean, to that point, the way medical care has changed in the last 18 years. It's unbelievable. So when we first came here, there was one little doctor way back in the trees. Okay? Now we have emergency care clinics.
Yeah.
I mean, SEMA Hospital was there before. That's a world-class hospital in San Jose. But virtually all your needs can be met in terms of health care and emergencies here. And so that's a huge difference. That was not the case 18 years ago.
Yeah. To wrap up on our common pitfalls, really we identified picking your team correctly, and that's something I've emphasized before. Your realtor, your real estate attorney, which normally your realtor will recommend, but also I think in all of these cases, your best source of information is local feedback from knowledgeable people. You know, ask about Tony's reputation in Tamarindo. You can find tons of people who have previously done business and get a character reference, whereas if you just go and try and find that first person who's friendly and is willing to work with you instead of doing your due diligence as a buyer, also with your attorney, you can end up with somebody who's not doing the best for you or really serving your interests well.
I mean, a key thing, which it seems obvious, but yet people violate, is never give anybody any money.
Yeah.
Never. We never take money from anybody.
Yeah.
Okay. So when people enter into a real estate transaction, they're going to have a contract in writing. There's going to be a number of days before they put their deposit into an escrow account.
Yeah.
I never asked anybody that ever asked you for money, red alert, shouldn't be that way. That's not the way a real estate transaction should happen in Costa Rica.
Yeah, absolutely. And another member of your team, usually being the escrow service agent who is independently managing money for the transaction. Another person to really check out and make sure that you've got a good recommendation. I wanted to quickly welcome Rudy Becker and Billy Jacob to our Facebook Live broadcast. We've got realtors, friends from the past, etc., joining us. Alejandra had another question that I think we'll sort of touch on the end because I want to make sure that we've gotten through the questions we had laid out beforehand. But thanks again for your question, Alejandro. In looking at types of people who have come down here, what can you find a common thread between people who just love Costa Rica and smile every day that they live here versus people who grit their teeth and end up moving back to the U.S. and selling their property?
I had one client that I was working with that was here for 2 days and said, "Take me back to the airport."
Yeah.
And you know what? I couldn't wait to take them back to the airport. They just weren't a fit.
Yeah.
I think people either get this or they don't.
Yeah.
And so when I'm talking with people, I encourage them. I mean, the selling process really is to provide services to our buyers. And the only way we can do that is convince them to come to have this experience. Because once they're here and get their feet on the ground, then they can really size this up and see if it's going to be a fit. It's very rare. It's happened, but it's very rare that somebody comes here and they're totally, disillusioned after a few years and decide to pull up stakes and go someplace else. I've seen it happen, but it's very rare. And if I were to try to characterize those people, it would probably be people, but it's like in any relationship. When you expect to change people, okay? And that's not a good recipe for a good relationship.
Yeah.
You know, you have to look at this and love it the way it is, know that changes are coming, but you have to be comfortable with it as you find it. Yeah. And if you are, you're going to be happy. But if you're coming here with the expectation of the need for change and it's not happening on your timetable, those are the people that are in trouble.
Yeah. just like with a boyfriend or girlfriend,
There you go.
you're not going to successfully change them. You're not going to change Costa Rica. And that can be very difficult for people to deal with. There's also, to me, less control than people might feel they have in their home country, where if they don't like something in their neighborhood, they might feel more empowered in the US because they've got a really systematic way to, petition their neighbors and say, we should make a rule that that guy has to cut his lawn or whatever's going on. Costa Rica is something that sometimes you find yourself in a situation and you think, well, I can see why this would be better if it were different, but you just have to accept.
Well, driving is a great example.
Yeah.
Okay. When I start getting irritated because somebody pulls over and stops in the middle of the road to talk to a friend, those are my old values.
Yeah.
I'm living in Costa Rica. That's perfectly normal for them. Get in the flow and know that you just wait for them or you go around them. But it's ridiculous to get upset by something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, this is their culture.
Exactly. And that's something that everyone who visits will quickly see, the relaxed culture, and hopefully experience before you move here what it truly means to have those little shocks where you think, oh, how is this guy just stopping in the road? And really you got to, it's always saying hi to his neighbor.
Yeah.
I can wait 5 seconds.
But the reality is you can't pull off the road because there is no off the road in a lot of places. So it's a 2-lane highway, and it's not like they have this elaborate place for safety lanes where you can pull over. So fact is, it's not so hard to pull off the road.
Yeah. You've touched base on a lot of the pros for people your age, retirees coming down here. We've got high livability now with a lot of creature comforts. Higher quality construction has come along. We've got great health care. For people looking at retiring in Costa Rica, let's say, versus retiring in Florida, what are the basic pros and cons that you see people weighing, and why does Costa Rica win out sometimes, or why does it lose out in some situations?
Yeah. Well, I think that the people that make this decision are looking for a new chapter in their life. And so in reality, it might be easier to retire in Florida, but it's not as much fun. It's not as exciting. It's not going to keep your juices going. It's not going to add to the depth of your experience on this planet over the course of your life. So I think people that come here, some of them had very great lives in the United States, but they came to the realization, as we did, that we didn't want to look back at our life, no matter how great it was, and it was, and have the same experience over and over and over again. I wanted a variety of experiences. And so I told Laurel, I go, I promise you, if we do this, it's going to be an adventure.
Yeah.
And it's been all of that.
Yeah, and that's especially thinking about people. I'm actually looking at doing the opposite and limiting, if my wife and I do stay here our whole lives, we will have had a very quiet, boring, sort of non-changing life. Because, we came here when I was in my mid-20s, and I'd like to stay in that same little house. Anyhow, but, reinventing yourself and keeping your juices flowing, I think that, especially talking to anybody that's older than 35, I don't necessarily, I take that for granted that really keeping life interested. I haven't had a really long career and ever felt like I needed a reinvention at this point. But for people who are perhaps leaving their career behind them and looking for something to do, moving to Florida means that staying in that routine round and round, day after day, until it's all over.
To me, it's too comfortable. You're asking the wrong guy here. Okay? Because I don't want a life that is so routine.
Yeah.
I think that I get energized by the variety of things that happen in the day here. I love the multicultural, international feeling nature of this town. We were involved, as you know, in a development called Rancho de Real. On the last count, there were 14 countries
Wow.
represented in that community. And, you know, I've met people from all over the world, as you have, that I would have never come in contact with. You know, a friend that right off the oil rigs from Canada, just a tough scrapping guy, you know, a brawler, and he became one of my best friends. When my mom passed away, he drove from Canada to Monterey, California to attend her service.
Wow.
And here's this brawler. He stands up and has a complete meltdown. He had to sit down and compose himself and then stand back up. And this was a beautiful, beautiful thing.
Gesture.
And we've met people from all over the world like this, that our lives, our paths would never have crossed. And it's very enriching.
Yeah, absolutely. And perhaps, you know, I think some of the components of life here, whether it's the international culture, etc., contribute to it being a blue zone. I think that the blue zone, for those of you watching, is, you know, a region where people routinely live to be over 100, or they do so in statistically higher numbers than anywhere else on the planet. There are only 5 or 6 blue zones on the planet. The Nicoya Peninsula, where we're sitting, is one of them. And you have to think that just because life is so gosh darn enjoyable, you know, the days are filled with nice variety. We have beautiful landscapes sort of surrounding us. And every day is filled with something nice that you sort of feel ready for a new day, instead of just, oh, you know, I've got to go about a routine. But instead it's, you know, driving to work, I get to go through 40 minutes of beautiful Guanacaste countryside. And even driving, my commute is something that, gosh, you know, by the time I'm in the car, I'm really happy that's, you know, part of my routine.
You know, the blue zone situation is fascinating. And we've seen it firsthand. It's not uncommon to see 75, 80-year-old cowboy on a horse with his shirt off, with a six-pack, and I don't mean a six-pack of beer, I mean rippled, okay, with a straight back, on a cell phone. I'm going, how is that possible? But you look at the way people live. And what I say to anybody that's thinking about retirement, or at any age really, you get to choose how you want to live here. You can hang at the bars, and you know that's fine, and you can do that. But if you choose to live healthy, I can't think of a better place to be. You know, Laurel goes to the farmer's market. She buys organic vegetables. We eat healthy. We get lots of exercise. We breathe clean air. There's no industry really to pollute the air. We have a good water source. So for those interested in, you know, extending their life in a healthy way, this is a great choice.
Fountain of youth. Always, it has always allured people for sure. That's absolutely certain. To touch on a very important question that's sort of more logistical and straightforward, what do most people in your age, 60, 70, start to look at for health insurance living here in Costa Rica? You know, especially a lot of the people that we're dealing with are going back to the U.S. for part of the year. What's the most common way that people cover themselves and handle it for people who, that's a very central question.
Okay. Well, I'm a maverick, and I don't suggest that everybody follows what I do, but I have Medicare. Okay, so about a year and a half ago, I had hip replacement surgery, as you know, and I was thinking about having it done here, which would have been fine in terms of the skills and the technology and the care. But it only cost me about $3,000 to go back to the United States and do it under Medicare. So what I see happening is that for ourselves, we're going to go back to the United States if we have any real serious thing going on. Okay. Other than that, we actually underwrite our own insurance because it's so inexpensive to go to doctors here. I mean, we can go to a doctor and for $50 sit down and talk to them and have tests done and this and that. And so it's impossible for us to even get to our deductible. Okay. So what we decided to do is save all that money, put it in an account, and just underwrite our own insurance and then go back to the United States if we need it. I'm comfortable with that because I know the healthcare here is so good and so affordable, and I know that if for some reason I had to make a more serious decision, I'd have some other choices.
Yep.
There are companies, for those who are uncomfortable not having healthcare insurance, that specialize in healthcare in Central America.
Yep.
There's actually a company that operates out of Florida that does that. And I just saw a sign the other day on the road that Blue Cross, I think, has policies now here in Costa Rica. So for those who are interested in having healthcare coverage here in Costa Rica, it's accessible to you. It's not a problem.
Yeah. I think it's good to hear, though, testimony that when you're speaking about underwriting your own insurance, you're saying pay out of pocket.
I do.
Yeah.
And it's the easiest thing in the world. If you live healthy and you think you're healthy and you intend to live that way, I don't want to give my money to an insurance company, but other people are so uncomfortable not being covered, then of course for them it's better to have the coverage.
Yeah. And really, my wife and I are living the same way in that the monthly premiums for us as young, healthy people quickly stack up to more than it's going to cost. Fingers crossed, knocking on wood, God willing, for our next emergency.
Sure.
We've had 2 kids born in private hospitals here and paid that out of pocket for less money than the 2 years of premiums we would have had to pay in order to be covered at the moment of birth.
Exactly.
And to see somebody who's in an age bracket, working that same way, in a different age bracket than me, working that same way, I think that expats should feel largely comfortable with that possible outcome.
It's a great alternative. It's good to look at. I mean, and then you make the best decision because you have both options.
Yep. And I do think, everything we say is not legal, medical advice, etc.
I'm not, I'm reluctant to even share that.
Yeah.
But that's the way I live. You have a right to know it. I've lived in here a long time, and I've saved massive amounts of money by these choices.
Yeah. And to me, catastrophic, there's a much different price bracket for the cost of surgeries, treatments, etc. in Costa Rica being far cheaper than the US.
Sure.
Where if something goes wrong and you have an emergency and you're suddenly paying out of pocket in an emergency room here, instead of something that's crippling financially for the rest of your life, it's something that,
I'll give people a concrete example. My son had a very serious surfing accident.
Okay.
He had an eye injury, and so they ambulanced him to SEMA Hospital. He was in the hospital for 3 or 4 nights. He had about a 4 or 5 hour surgery with a whole staff of surgeons. We go to check out, and the whole thing was $3,500. Can you imagine that in the United States?
$3,500 for eye surgery, 4 nights in the hospital.
And then we patched him up and sent him to Baylor Eye Clinic in Texas. I mean, that's a very different number.
Yeah, exactly. They charge you $3,500 for the glasses. Yeah, absolutely. No, and our children, one cost $6,000 or $7,000, and the other was in the $7,000 to $8,000 range. So very much, rather than, I know my sister got she's insured, but in Chicago, a childbirth cost tens, between $30,000 and $40,000. And those sorts of costs just don't ruin lives here like they might in the U.S.
And it's not just the money; it's the way they practice medicine. You go in and you see your doctor, and there's not 30 people sitting there, and the doctor's not running 2 hours behind.
Yeah.
And you get in to see him, and he actually wants to get to know you, and he has the time to do it because he's not on this treadmill where he has to see 50 patients a day to cover his malpractice insurance. I mean, the U.S. system has lots of issues. We have fine doctors there, but they have issues about the way they have to run their practices. Here is a very, very different experience. And so I love the fact that I can go in and see my doctor and have a personal conversation with him, and I don't see him looking at his watch, and and he takes time with me.
Yeah.
When my mom was here, she was having some problems, And I called our doctor, and he actually, it was a Saturday, he closed his office. He came to our house. He spent 45 minutes caring for my mother, and then gave me a bill for $50. Okay? And I told him, this is not enough.
Yeah.
I mean, it was amazing. I mean, you'll have a good experience with our medical system.
Yeah, that's very much what we found as well. And it's that perspective that they're moving slowly, that there's more deliberate care is great. To finally wrap up here, we did have one question from Alejandro. That's a good one. It's totally off where we just came with health insurance and health-related things. But, Tony, where is the hottest, most dynamic section of the real estate market in Guanacaste right now? He gave a bunch of ideas for lots under 100,000, condos, houses, villas. I don't think we'll be able to be that specific with our time. But where is, the hot market in Costa Rica right now?
Sure. If you're looking to buy, say, a condominium as a vacation rental, then I don't think you can beat Langosta Tamarindo. Okay. Mainly because if you look at the airport statistics, the number of tourists that are coming into the area, and you just look at the history of the returns on investment that people are generating in this area, it's the best. Our prices are higher because of that.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it. But if you want stability, because, when you buy real estate, buyers, here's another thing, alludes back to the other question about what should people watch out for. Just because a piece of property is inexpensive doesn't mean it's a good deal. Because you need to have an exit strategy.
Yep.
Okay. So what I say to buyers is when they're buying a property, they should check it out in terms of the day's going to come when they're going to want to sell it. If they buy in our market, there is a built-in market. They're going to be able to sell their property.
Yep.
When you buy in much more remote areas, I'm talking about way remote areas, I mean, you can get properties for less money, but then, your exit strategy becomes much more difficult. So I would say in all categories, this is the area where you want to be if your money works here. If your budget doesn't work for our area, then of course you have to branch out. I think that, down in your area, in the Junquial, that whole area down there is a gold mine into the future. I think that that's where the growth has to occur, and same a little bit north. But the southern area, we've been waiting for years for it to kind of take off. I mean, its time's coming. If you can find properties down there, great. But I would start here, this being the first place that I would look, and then, if necessary, branch out from there.
Yeah. So especially from an investment standpoint, recommending Tamarindo, Langosta, and I absolutely see things from your perspective on that, because moving here in 2008, everybody that I got to know in the first years of my real estate career in 2011, 12, 13, when I was working in neighborhoods, those people were dealing with the effects of a market downturn that were leaving them in an isolated area with properties they could not sell. And their exit strategy went out the window all of a sudden, and a lot of people, especially in Junquial, had to sit on their property for absolutely unbelievable time periods compared to how fast real estate sells in the US or mature markets there. And lots of people end up regretting their decision simply because that exit strategy on the back end, someday either you don't want to live in Costa Rica anymore, or your kids don't want to live in Costa Rica.
Yeah, life changes.
Lives change, absolutely. And if it's especially with properties that are going to be your vacation or investment second home, you need to be thinking about someday when you're going to get rid of it. And absolutely in Tamarindo and Langosta, having worked here much less time than I've worked down in Junquial, I think that's a huge appeal to people looking at it. And at the same time, it's an enormous risk, no matter where else you're buying in the country, that you're going to sit on that property someday when you don't want it, or you can't maintain it, or your finances have changed. And, you know, if you're sitting there with that beautiful oceanfront piece that's on a remote, bumpy road, you might be, you know, sitting on that property for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is real estate in the long term is a hard investment to beat. But in the short term, it's different. So if somebody gets in a jam in the short term, they're the ones that get hurt in real estate are the ones that can't weather the storm, and they can't wait for a normal marketing period. If a normal marketing period for your property is 3 years and you need to have your money in 6 months, you're in trouble if you're in remote areas.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's why I think that for people that have any concerns about that, you increase your liquidity as you enter into markets that are more active like ours.
Yeah, absolutely. Liquidity is very important in a dynamic market, and
For sure.
here's a place where properties retain their real value because you can actually sell them someday.
Yep.
I'll open it up briefly if anybody happens to be watching that would like to submit another question as we start to sign off here. But anyhow, this has been an extreme pleasure here today with Tony DiMaggio, a almost 20-year veteran of Costa Rica, but one of the people with most experience and invaluable insight to offer. I'm very thankful for you for offering your wisdom through my network.
Yeah, that's the opportunity. I hope this was a benefit. I mean, you look back at these things and you wish you had said this or that or the other, but it's straight and it's right there for you. So I hope there's some value.
Absolutely. And the fun part is going to be, this is, I think, the first time that Tony has been on a social media platform doing anything live. And it's one of the first video pieces he's ever done as well. So I'm looking forward to you now being able to use this in your contact with your clients. Yeah. Anyhow, thank you very much for tuning in. We appreciate everyone. Thanks so much to our clients. Have a great day. Feel free to send us any questions. If you would like to follow up with us, you can get us at either matt@cbtamarindo.com or tony@cbtamarindo.com. To quickly resume today, we went through a lot of topics, but in talking to Tony, we sort of looked at the history of the Guanacaste real estate market, changes we've seen in Costa Rica, and really focused on Tony's experience as a retirement age person, bringing a lot of people down here and some of the pitfalls that he's seen, the pros and cons for people his age. We'll be putting this video up to onto YouTube here after the broadcast so that people can review it, and please let us know how we can be helpful to you. Once again, this is Matt Rosensteel.
This is Tony DiMaggio.
Have a great day and pura vida.